All right. Well, thank you. Good evening, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm Henrik Schatzinger, Interim Director of the Center for Politics and the People, and I'm also a professor of political science. Again, thank you for joining us, either in person or via the Ripon College Live Events channel. Tonight we will discuss how cancel culture functions, how it interacts with the First Amendment, and what the consequences are for our society. I am thrilled to welcome two excellent panelists to discuss questions surrounding cancel culture. Let me introduce them to you. First, we have Dr. Duke Pesta. He is an associate professor of English at UW-Oshkosh, and he is the academic director of FreedomProject Education. He received his master's degree in Renaissance literature from John Carroll University. He also has a BA from that university in English and history, and he has a PhD in Shakespeare and Renaissance literature from Purdue University. He has taught at major research institutions and small liberal arts colleges on a wide variety of subjects at the graduate and undergraduate levels, including courses on Shakespeare, the Bible, Russian literature, Christian apologetics, and C.S. Lewis. His book, The Renaissance and the Postmodern, A Study in Comparative Critical Values, was published by Routledge in 2016. Dr. Pesta speaks at homeschool conventions and educational conferences across the nation on topics including the necessity of homeschooling, the decline of morality and critical thinking in public schools, and the myriad ways colleges and universities indoctrinate students. He has delivered more than 1,500 talks across the nation on the dangers of Common Core and other educational topics. He has testified about Common Core before a number of state legislatures, and he has participated in more than 3,000 radio, television, and Skype interviews around the world. He is active in educational reform and was instrumental in developing and implementing an elective Bible course for public high school students in Texas. I will also mention that Dr. Pesta is host of the Dr. Duke Show, and you can access that show at via drdukeshow.com. It focuses on education primarily. Our second panelist, Jamar Thomas, a student class of 2025, is a Ripon College student from Houston, Texas. He is a history and secondary education major, a student athlete in cross country and track and field, and a member of the Black Student Union and Circle K. I'm very grateful that Jamar has stepped up last minute to serve as a stand-in tonight. One of our original panelists, Nada Elmi-Kashfi, who serves as the Chief of Staff for Wisconsin State Rep. Francisco Hong, is unable to participate tonight due to a family emergency. So, with that being said, please join me in welcoming our panelists. So our plan for this evening is as follows. I will begin by engaging the panelists in a series of questions, maybe for around 35 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to questions from you, the audience. So with all of that being said, why don't we get started? And I'm sure I have probably some more questions that we can get to, or maybe later on during the Q&A we can touch on some of these questions. So let me start out with what cancel culture really is or means. It seems to me that there are different definitions out there of the term, and of course it would be desirable to have some kind of common foundation for our discussion. And I want to kind of know from you, what is cancel culture to you, and how it is perhaps also different from other maybe similar concepts, such as boycotts or public shaming or calling someone out, or is it all part of cancel culture? Why don't we start? Well, you want to start? Or
I can begin.
Make sure you hold it close to you.
Yeah. So to me, cancel culture is a type of accountability and maybe a light censorship enacted after an individual or group has acted or spoken out in a manner that is destructive or prejudicial. I think that that does not necessarily go to ending someone's career or taking back things they've earned, like in a legal manner. But I do believe that it prevents maybe ideas from being silenced or harmed.
Thanks. How about you, Dr.
I
Pesta?
think that's a good start, I really do. I would suggest, however,
Also
that,
make sure it's close
would I
enough.
suggest, however, that unfortunately it does exactly what you said that you wish it didn't do. It does try to seek to remove people from jobs, to give them a sort of a social culture trail that can harm them down the road. I very much believe in the search for justice, I believe that. But I don't think you get to justice by trying to shut down people who don't agree with you, even people who radically don't agree with you. I think that, to me, what cancel culture means is going beyond free speech, going beyond the ability of people to have their own opinions, going beyond the idea that people can make mistakes, and trying to in a mob capacity, not in an individual way, using the power of things like the internet to bully and to constrain and ultimately try to get people into the kind of trouble that strikes me as very, very un-American in the end.
And yeah, okay, so that's a starting point, and I want to maybe talk a little bit about the process of cancellation and what you think it really entails. So I think one of the concerns is that there is generally a presumption of guilt, for people who are being canceled, followed by the call to really cancel somebody. But can this really be effective in our media environment today that constantly battles for our attention? I think, what are we arguing about if you believe that cancel culture is generally ineffective? So I want to learn more about how you think about what does cancel culture entail, and can it really be effective?
I'll begin. I think cancel culture, firstly, can be a learning experience for all, and I think by doing that, the way it does that is by first letting those ideas come out, because of course in order to be canceled, those ideas have to be presented, and whether it's in the media, in the school, or in the government, and the way the media or the dominant culture can refute or agree with that, I feel like that's the way America has worked for decades. There's always been a push and pull, and I think the way we're seeing cancel culture now is not necessarily unfair punishment, but reasonable punishment. Maybe people have gone out their way to say things that are really harmful, and in that way, I think we're moving past cancel culture and to rightful action. I think cancel culture is that first level of that where we stop the whatever isn't right in its tracks and let's take a step back a little bit. What's wrong with these thoughts? Why aren't they guiding us towards the truth and what is right? And how can we get there? I feel like what you described was a very radical view of that. And I think that's past cancel culture. I think that's where you get to disenfranchisement and things of that nature.
Well, the word cancel is pretty specific, and so from my perspective, I agree with what you're saying, that we should have social monitoring. I'm not bothered by that. But when you're starting with cancel, I don't think you can move beyond cancel unless you're going to arrest or even kill people. When you think about this, you used a lot of terms like right and good and true. With all due respect, those are very, very defined differently by all kinds of people. There are so many different worldviews, so many religious, secular views, philosophical views, common sense views, emotional views, to suggest that there is a specific way of doing this, a right way of doing this, that there's one truth when it comes to these issues, is really fraught for abuse. I'll give you one example. There are a lot of people in this world, I don't agree with any of them, who would like to cancel the Holocaust. Don't believe it happened, don't think we should teach it, talk about it. Canceling the Holocaust would be a disaster. I don't like to cancel ideas, bad ideas either. I don't want to cancel the idea of fascism. I want people to remember it in all its horror. When you cancel, when you ignore, when you make things unsafe to talk about, you are putting us in a position where these ideas will come back with a wicked vengeance. If history teaches us nothing, it teaches that. And what's so unique about the United States, I think, is that we allow bad speech. The First Amendment allows it because you can argue with bad speech, you can talk to people, you can try to win them over. But canceling, think about this for a second. In the last 75 years, that's the process that we're talking about. And I want to get back to your question, maybe we can follow up. But the process of this is what I'm suggesting is the problem. This kind of behavior is exactly what we see in communist regimes, fascist regimes, this silencing of dissent, this shaming people into silence, taking them out of positions, and then even more drastic moments after that, once this dominant ideology has gotten this cancel part into the culture. So we have a lot of bad examples of what happens when we walk down this road from history.
As someone pursuing becoming a history teacher, I agree that a lot of historical events should be talked about, but I think when we see those things being canceled, we see them being talked about maybe the wrong way in the wrong place, maybe even the wrong time. I feel like there are groups who are still feeling trauma from those events, and how you go about that can lead to you being canceled or not. I don't think that maybe you have like some examples or some instances where it has occurred, but I haven't seen the instances or examples where Holocaust is being taught somewhere and it just being outright canceled just from being talked about. In my own schooling, we talked about the Holocaust, whether we talked about it on both sides, the cons, why the Nazis thought it was a good idea. It was a bad thing. We can all admit that lots of people died, it wasn't a good thing. So when you talk about why the Holocaust was a good thing, it's not a good thing. That's true. So that notion needs to be canceled.
I mean, you could make the same argument about slavery then, that maybe we shouldn't talk about it. I would hate to see that happen.
No, you do talk about it, but you can't make that claim that it is a good thing. I think that's where canceling comes from.
So you're saying that anybody who thinks this Holocaust is a good thing, that should be canceled? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
or that slavery was a good thing?
Yes.
Okay. Again, I would go back to the argument that the world's a much bigger place than America, and there are people all over the world, in certain parts of the world in particular, where serious intellectuals want to cancel that idea. And it's not because there's trauma being given to the survivors of that. It's because there's a historical record that's bigger than individual feelings, or even collective feelings. That history has to be told. It needs to be made available to our kids. We can do everything we can to try to mitigate that. We can do everything we can to try to comfort those who are bothered by those truths, but we can't hide them. And go back to your point about the process. So I looked at 274 articles in preparation for this talk. I'm writing a book anyway, so it was research for me. And of those 274 books and chapters, 125 of them could be considered right-wing sources, and 149 can be considered liberal or progressive sources. And I distilled from all of that research on both sides of the aisle a number of features of cancel culture as we're seeing it now. I'd like to share some of them with you without comment, just to get them on the table here, because this is the process that we see how working by. So with cancel culture, optics are more important than substance. It's virtue signaling, right? Getting a Twitter mob to stop somebody getting fired from their job, it doesn't fix anything. It's pure optics. Under cancel culture, and kind of what you were hinting at, engagement with other viewpoints equals endorsement. If you're willing to sit down and talk to somebody with really bad ideas, according to cancel culture, that means you are underwriting or supporting those ideas. Association in cancel culture is complicity. People can be justly reduced to their worst action or idea. No grace, no forgiveness. These are all things that almost all the articles had in common when they were critiquing it from the right and left. This is a big one. The passage of time and history are irrelevant. Doesn't matter if you were 11-year-old when you said something bad on your social media. Kids are getting locked out of colleges now because of something they said 4, 10, 12 years ago when they were little. So, and then think about history, right? When we talk about history, we no longer contextualize history. 200 years ago, they had a very different moral code with regarding some things that we find atrocious. We can condemn that worldview, but to go back and heap nothing, but try to cancel them for what every other nation believed too is problematic. I mean, so there's no sensitivity to time and history. People with alternative ideas now we're being told under cancel culture. People with alternative ideas are threatening safety with their words. That's a problem to me. If certain worldviews and opinions cause harm, well, then you have to cancel them, right? Do they really cause harm? Or are people using that to get ideas they don't like removed? The open exchange of ideas. The First Amendment can't be trusted anymore. Accusers, and this is a big one, even hearsay are always reliable. We saw this all across this country in the last 5 years. Unsubstantiated claims against people are taken as absolute truth if it's coming from the right political perspectives, even hearsay. Exaggeration, dishonesty, ruthlessness in the cause of social justice is now called justice. And a couple more. Vengeance is another word for justice. And a lot of cancel culture is punishing somebody for saying something you don't like. And the justification for it is bad things happened in the past. That strikes me as inherently dishonest. And finally, I think this is an important one. For many of who get behind the cancel culture mob, change can only come if the country, its institutions, and its history are overthrown. There can be no solution from within. We've got to tear it over and start over. And these are all extreme points. And I would repeat again that religions, inquisitors, communist, socialist, fascist, they all did this. This is exactly what they did. And we say we're doing it for the right reasons. There are no right reasons when power is more important than justice here in these situations.
I'm going to give Jamar a chance to respond, and then we will go to discuss some concrete examples.
You said a lot there, but to touch on what you said about the Twitter mobs and punishing people, first, I don't think that people are being punished. I think that it is accountability again. I think punishment is a severe word that I think invokes some lawful things being done to take away from people. Would you say that that is being done?
What is lawful about what is the law that tells us we have the right to fire people from their careers because they say a word you don't like? Where do we find that? Use the word lawful. Where in law do we find that?
Well, I see that in the First Amendment. Speech is okay, but there are restrictions to that. And one of those harassment, if the speech being used is harassing other people, then that is unlawful.
Well, who decides what harassment is?
Well, it's in the Constitution.
No. Not where is it in the Constitution?
I spoke too fast before you finished.
Well, so, I mean, harassment is, what I'm suggesting, because I think you make a very eloquent point. What I'm suggesting, though, is a lot of the words we're using, like punishment, lawful punishment, harassment, these are subjective words.
Right.
And I guarantee you there's somebody watching this, either in this room right now or on TV, there's somebody watching this who thinks what I'm saying is harassment. I guarantee you it's happening. That this is over the pale, this is insensitive. It's happening. So, just because somebody feels that, is it true? So who decides this? And that's where I think the Founding Fathers were actually quite prescient in setting up a system where you are innocent until proven guilty. If I'm harassing you in ways that are legal tort, that I can be punished, absolutely. But is that making an offhand comment on a Facebook page 3 years ago? Is that as telling a bad joke? I mean, what qualifies legally? And because I think I'm really grateful for you to bring in the law into this. We are a nation of laws. But continue your comments.
I'd like to first put out there that I think this is a great thing, getting these ideas out. But I think just in human nature, we are in pursuit of what is just. And to get to one clear-cut thing that we all can exist under like one nation, I think that is impossible without some type of cancel culture. I think if you have a lot of ideas coming out, especially present day where there are so many cultures with so many intricate histories being merged in, that you can't just have all the ideas coming out and reigning over each other, because we live in a world where there are dominant cultures and there are some cultures that can't get those ideas out the way that other people. And I think that in itself is some radical form of cancel culture that maybe we're not aiming for, but maybe was being presented. And we've seen that in history.
I think you make a wonderful point about, in the past, not everybody was equally free to speak what they mean. And I think that's a good point. However, I go back to what the Founding Fathers said, that we are a nation of laws, not a nation of people. There can't be too many ideas. There can't be, because the minute you start harvesting ideas, the minute you start limiting them, the minute you start giving ideas from certain peoples more gravity because of what they may have suffered, or what their race or ethnicity may be, then you are doing the exact thing that you're saying that you're fighting, right? Civilization, democracy is messy. It's messy. And it's messy for a good reason, because the countries that don't have that mess tend to be very totalitarian in nature.
Perhaps we can move to a couple of concrete, examples from popular culture, and I wanted to, because, how do we hear this term? Often through social media outlets, and so on. So I have a couple of examples for each of you, and I want to kind of, hear maybe both sides, how you think about this. So if we just go back a few years, right, when was this term cancel culture popularized? One of the first major cases that was trending was cancel R. Kelly. And some people felt that it was time to hold the musician R. Kelly accountable for accusations in relation to child sexual abuse and child pornography. And it took it took a few years, and then in fact last year he was sentenced to 31 years in prison. I want to mention one more example. Ye, also known as Kanye West, formerly known as Kanye West, he appeared in Alex Jones's InfoWars, where he praised Adolf Hitler. He denied the Holocaust, and he identified as a Nazi. And in this case, it was Twitter itself who canceled him by suspending his account. So my question is, should people like Kelly and Ye be canceled? Let's start with Dr. Pesta for a second.
I would say absolutely not. I mean, R. Kelly's in jail for a crime that was, as far as we can tell, proven. He's being punished, like you said, lawfully, for the crime of whatever it was, sex with a minor or whatever it was. And so what does that have to do with his ability to raise money from his songs? What does that have to do with any other, if he gets out of jail, are we going to insist that now he served his sentence by law and we've still got to keep canceling him? And I'd say the same thing about Ye, that's how you pronounce that? Kanye West. Same thing I would say about him. I mean, his free speech is as important as anybody else. And you know what? You want to read Mein Kampf? You want to identify as a Nazi? Do it. I would imagine the rest of us would try to disabuse him of those ideas peacefully, without trying to destroy his legacy or his money or his career. I don't see the virtue in that. That strikes me as rather fascist. So, and I would say this, if we haven't gotten to the point in this country or in the West where we don't have the answers to confront Nazism without violence, then there's something much deeper wrong about our culture.
But wouldn't you say that there are benefits of cancel culture? Because at that point, when this hashtag was trending, there was no investigation because people thought he got away with something, right? So ultimately, there was enough pressure to start an investigation, and ultimately he was, R. Kelly, he was ultimately convicted, right? So don't you see, that these campaigns can have some real world effect?
I mean, his accusations against him go back 25 years. So it was not a new thing. I don't know to the degree to which cancel culture forced a prosecutor somewhere to look into that. I don't have any evidence that that's true. But I do think, right, that cancel culture, raising the issues that cancel culture people want to raise aren't bad issues. I'm not arguing with their right to say it. I'm simply saying that they're playing judge and executioner with people that they don't know. And again, thank God for our Constitution that says you're innocent until you're proven guilty. And you can't have mobs deciding this. You can't have faceless people on anonymous Twitter gang mobbing people into silence. You can't have it. I mean, it's a free country, you can do it. I'm telling you, it's morally corrupt. And it's as bad as the thing that you're fighting.
We discuss a lot on social media, separating the artist or creator from the creation. But with something like R. Kelly happens, where these crimes happened 25 years ago, and again over that time, and he is still being allowed to continue on with this happening, maybe still committing these things without there coming a stop to it, there's an issue there. And with the use of social media, we get this out, get investigation to spark, and bring something truly evil to an end. That's like some of the strengths of cancel culture. With Kanye West, there's a theory of popular influence, that the things you say can truly have an effect on its followers, and they can lead to harmful things and maybe uprisings that can lead to harmful action. I think cancel culture can be like kind of like a first stop to that happening. And I don't think that any canceling is fine, or like no sentencing is like, no sentencing with cancel culture is without anything actually occurring under law that, you know, is in the law that would lead to like a permanent sentencing. There is none of that in cancel culture.
Well, I personally, I just don't see a connection between the cancel mob and his arraignment and his arrest, which was based on evidence and testimony in a jury trial. Certainly the uproar on social media may have drawn more attention to it, but I just can't see that link between the one, you know, that's what finally brought to justice R. Kelly. But I would repeat what I said before. He's legally in jail for what he illegally did. When his sentence is over, he can walk out. My point is that if he's in jail and his music is making money, he shouldn't be canceled, he should keep it. He should not be withheld from whatever any other prisoner can do in prison. And when he gets out, he should not have to suffer the consequences beyond what the law has done. And what really kind of makes me a little nervous, and you're a much better man than I am, if you think you have, or any mob thinks that they have, that capacity to determine what is justice and vengeance, what is our role in bringing to justice people who say things that we don't like. So there's a difference between, so I think Kanye is a better example here, right? Because there's no crime in the way. You can say stupid things. That's the privilege of Americans. And Americans do it every day. I do it too. But I'd rather have a nation of people saying stupid things than a nation who punishes people for saying stupid things. Because it doesn't just stop. It never just stops with grand offenders. I'll give you one example myself. This is from just 2 days ago. There is a superintendent of schools who was just hired in East Hope, Massachusetts. He was hired to be the superintendent after an exhaustive search. The very first day before the school board, right when he was about to start, he wrote an email to the two ladies who were in charge of his hiring. And he addressed the letter, the email, "Dear ladies, I want to thank you, blah, blah, blah." They immediately fired him for using the term lady. They canceled him. They said, as a teacher, he should know better to use the word lady. It is classist and elitist. And as a teacher, we cannot anymore have faith in his ability to teach or to be a superintendent. And he was removed. That's what I'm talking about. That's not Nazis, and that's not denying the Holocaust. And that stuff goes on all across this country, all over the place. And that to me is way too much.
Again, you said a lot there. I'd like to go back to the beginning. I think you said something very crucial there with America, and people say stupid things every day. I think some choice goes into there in what is stupid and what is not. And just using the word stupid, that is something that indicates harm or disagreement. And you say that you think people should be allowed to say stupid things. People are allowed to say stupid things, but where do we draw the line in that? Do we just allow people to say stupid things? I think words are powerful, and words can lead to action. I think, again, cancel culture is a line of defense to stop that. Talking about R. Kelly again, like what I said before, canceling is not final. You can come back from being canceled. And his music was not permanently removed from Spotify or other things. He could still profit from those music. It's just the person's choice to listen to that music. I don't think that's canceling.
What I would suggest to you is that the richer you are, the more safe you are. J.K. Rowling is being attacked because she doesn't believe in transgenderism, right? She's very vocal about that. She's being attacked for that. But she's a billionaire, so there's not much they can do to her, right? I'm not worried about the R. Kellys or the Kanye West or the J.K. Rowling. Dave Chappelle is uncancelable, right? There's another guy, young African-American Muslim. He would be, in many ways, the ideal victim of this culture. Young, black, and Muslim. He's getting persecuted and attacked left and right by cancel culture warriors because he just does not agree with cancel culture. That's what he's complaining about. It's not that he's anti-LGBTQ. He doesn't like the tactics of the LGBTQ activists who want to cancel anybody who disagrees with them. And for that, he's undergoing a tremendous amount of stress, but he's rich and he's talented. I'm not worried about him. I'm worried about the superintendent who just lost his job. And by the way, who in Massachusetts now do you think is going to hire him? Now that he was fired for the evil crime of using the word ladies. This is who I worry about. And I would suggest, too, that the more disenfranchised you are in this culture, either ethnically or racially or in terms of your wealth, the more you need what we do have. You say, who decides? You say, where does this come from? I think the system we have here, as flawed as it is, as abusable as it can be, still provides the single best protection that any civilization has ever come up with. We're going to start from the premise of free speech. If somebody crosses a line that is illegal, then you can act. But if you don't, then you can't. It's that idea, right? Better, well, I'm taking too much time, I'll stop there, go ahead.
Well, you can finish your final.
No, I think that's enough. I'm throwing a lot at you, so I want to give you equal time, so don't let me talk over you.
Thank you. With that point you made about the teacher or administrator superintendent who was fired for saying lady, I'd like to admit that cancel culture is incomplete, but is leading the right way, and I think that sparked a conversation that was leading towards the greater good, and maybe in the future that won't happen anymore, or maybe we're clearing the language issues with things. Like, neither of us are women, so neither of us know. We can be aware of the history, and we also, as time progresses, have to be aware of the effects that have on people. Like, you couldn't go into a workplace and say words that make people who are different from you feel uncomfortable. You have to respect that. There's respect in the workplace and among people.
So the word lady now is out of pale because we're not women?
And who are we to...
See, with all due respect, the problem I have with cancel culture is exactly this problem. No one's allowed to talk to anybody. No one's allowed. I mean, this actually happened to me in class. I was teaching C.S. Lewis a couple weeks ago. And have you ever read the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis? There's a wonderful set of paragraphs where this character is talking to another woman and giving her advice. And so I was reading that, and she was getting angry. I could see her sitting there, and she finally raised her hand and she said, "Who is C.S. Lewis, and who are you to tell women anything? You're not women. You have no right to talk, and he has no right to talk about women." And of course, that opened a great can of worms. So as I pointed out to her, I said, well, if that's true, why are you closed-mindedly limiting it to gender? The boy sitting next to you, I don't know anything about him any more than I do you, even though we both have penises, right? I don't know any more about him than I know about you. If you're going to carry that idea to its logical conclusion, that means none of us can ever really talk about anything with any of it else. And finally, she saw the problem there. She saw that. This idea that what cancel culture does is it creates a hierarchy of who's allowed to speak and who's not. I'll give you another example. I've been at 7 different universities. I find there's almost nothing too progressive that you can't say in a public university. There are a lot of things, even marginally conservative things, that you can't say. And that's a problem. And when I say you can't say it, I am the recipient of 3 Title IX complaints. I'll give you, very quickly, I've got to tell you the story. And you will come back to it, because it is an important point to make. But the fact that this is being used against people in very serious and expensive ways, I mean, I could testify a lot about that.
I like the example of you and the young woman in your classroom. I think, again, that's just a conversation. And maybe there's a problem with the individual not being open-minded to what you have to say. But again, I don't think that's cancel culture. I think that might have moved a little off topic. I was gonna go on after bringing up what I said about the superintendent being fired for using the word lady. I think that there was discussion that came after that, and do you know where the superintendent is now? Is he still?
It only happened, he only got fired a couple days ago.
A couple days ago? I want to say that I can assure you that a lot of talking going about this, and this man will get hired again. Maybe he was convinced in some way, or not, but if he is right, he will gain a respect for the individual. I think we live in that world now where we live in America that is a melting pot, and there's a lot of different cultures. We have to start gaining empathy and respect for each of those. And it's a time where cancel culture will make you go with that or leave you behind, because we are moving forward with these things.
I mean, think of what you just said. You either get on board or else, right? You okay with that?
It's a slow moving thing, but yes, I think we're moving away from a lot of the more radical and harmful things that threaten different people. And I think for most of the past, we've had a dominant culture that has not allowed these cultures to come out and say things. And I think now with cancel culture, we're allowing those people to be heard and for things to change. So there is an open window for other people.
It doesn't sound to me like you're allowing them to speak. You're giving them absolute ability to say anything they want.
Maybe
at the
we're
expense of other people.
Maybe we're stopping the dominant culture and allowing those doors for different people to come up. That we're being more diverse in doing that.
Let me sort of interject here. I think it's good to have back and forth. I much rather have it this way than just me asking a number of questions and throwing out more examples. Well, we will see how it plays out with the superintendent. I don't think it'll be the end of his career, though, using the word lady, but that remains to be seen. I think, let's move on to questions from the audience. You guys have been patient. We're a good number of minutes into this. Jacob.
Yeah, so I kind of want to start, thank you for coming here. I was very much looking forward to this. So I want to ask, at least from my perspective, we've seen kind of like a transition from like political correctness into cancel culture. I feel like I don't even need to say that, I just kind of know it. But I'm sure Dr. Pesta, you're familiar with Dr. Jordan Peterson, and one of my absolute favorite things he's ever said, and I think it's a very important thing that many of us should think about, is he says, this isn't cancel culture necessarily about what you can't say. It's about what you have to say. What are your thoughts on that?
If you don't mind, you can just repeat the question, or I can do it in this case. And the question is cancel culture really about what you cannot say, but rather more what you have to say to be politically correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is the point I was trying to make. This is a slippery slope. It never stops with good-natured cultural adjustment. It always goes too far. And it did that in socialism, communism, Christianity. All the religions were great religions have done that to some degree. So this is a human problem. And that's exactly right. So it's not anymore enough to just not say the wrong thing. You have to accede to everything that's being said. And the one thing I didn't get to say to you, because I think it's an important point, is it seems to me that what you're suggesting is, unless you're progressive, you really don't get to say anything. You have to shut up and listen because the dominant culture, if you're not progressive, right, you either keep your mouth shut or you assent, which to me is personally alarming. But I think
or you have attended the wrong institutions, because I think the Ripon College, in my opinion, has done a great job of allowing people to speak their mind. Our student body is also more diverse in terms of their political and various backgrounds, to be honest. So I think there are places for you to, I feel like, where you can say without having to be thinking about whether everything you say is politically correct. But I'm sure there are some institutions where this is more questionable.
I was gonna add that there's been a historical push and pull, and by saying that, I don't mean that in like a way for I don't want those people here. That's just what we've seen. We've seen things come up and a primitive form of cancel culture, because cancel culture isn't something new. Cancel culture has been going on all throughout history. It's why some of the ideas that were favored back then, maybe in the 1600s are not favored now. It's because we've moved past them. We have new worldviews that are now being moved into play, and I think they offer more things to be heard, and those things to be heard without harm. There are things that can come from left and right that can be both helpful and things that can be both disarming in some way.
If you don't mind, just to kind of keep more questions sort of coming from the audience, let's move to some more questions. Former Dean of Faculty and English Professor Doug Northrup.
I'm still very confused about cancel culture because I haven't a clue what it is. When the parents go to the school board and say, you cannot teach gender politics, is that cancel culture? When the Tennessee legislature says, you three are out of here, is that cancel culture?
Well, in the case of the school boards, if you're protesting that, because my understanding is that moms and dads aren't protesting those ideologies, they're protesting them in elementary and middle school. So, and I've been to many of those meetings myself. It's not that people don't want those issues discussed, it's about what happened in Florida, right?
So you cancel at one level but not at another.
Well, is it canceling? No one's saying you can't teach them, they're saying to what age. We have that, I mean, we have that with everything, right? I mean, but the second one in Tennessee, I agree with you, right? I think and cancel culture is apolitical. People, all of Christians have done it. It's all over the place. So I would suggest, yes, that the three Tennessee legislators being removed was an example of that. And that's going to hurt their career, definitely. But I think when it comes to the school board protests, they tend to be, there's a lot more going on. So you could make the argument, I suppose, if you are all for teaching advanced sexuality to little kids, then it would be considered cancel culture. I wouldn't necessarily myself make that argument, but you could make the argument.
Perhaps maybe to kind of put another sort of angle to it, right? So maybe the question could be, aren't conservatives the real cancel culture people here? Because they are the ones, some of them are maybe the ones who are canceling DEI initiatives in Florida, banning books in libraries, and so on. And maybe there isn't enough tolerance on that side.
I started from the premise that this is a human problem, right? I would say, since we're going down this road, one of the things that I hear all the time from the social justice activists is whoever has power has the greater ability to do harm. And when you think about our institutions, whether it's entertainment, whether it's journalism, whether it's the tech communities, whether it's law schools, it does seem to me that there's a lot of power in the hands of progressives like universities, and so you see a lot of it there. I mean, I'm suggesting that cancel culture is everywhere, needs to be stopped everywhere, but it's worse in the people who have the most power. And wherever across the political divide that is, wherever the hegemony is, that's where the most damage, and think about what hegemonies do. They try to silence the minority view. Sometimes that's a conservative view. I would suggest in many colleges it's a minority view. And in other places it's not. Conservative states, for instance. So my point here is that the more power you have, the less you should morally be engaged in that kind of cancellation. And what we don't want is what's happened in so many countries that preceded us. When one ideology takes over, whether it's on the right or the left, it does a really good job of snuffing dissent across the board, period.
I'd like to mention that the reason those ideologies aren't superior anymore is due to cancel culture. So far in the 90s, and the right with Jim Crow and laws against interracial and same-sex marriage, we've seen that is a form of cancel culture being brought up to the legal scene, and then in turn that creates discussion for things to keep moving. I feel like in your world where there is no cancel culture, you just have thoughts being played with and no action happens. I feel like that leads to chaos.
Well, honestly, I don't think that cancel culture is what brought about the civil rights movement, nor ended the prohibitions against interracial marriage. Who was the power to cancel that? The people who canceled that rose up from the lower strata. They were the ones that were disenfranchised. This wasn't cancel culture that did that, it was speech. marching and speaking and talking and writing. That's what liberated people, not freezing out and trying to cancel people who think differently than you. And in fact, it's kind of infantilizing. This idea that there are certain groups that can't handle ideas because it hurts their feelings, or that they're not capable of arguing as well as anybody else, and so we have to stop anybody arguing with them. It's the worst kind of racist paternalism, that this minority group can't speak for itself, can't articulate what they want to, so we, privileged white liberals, have to do it for them. That's insulting. But it's not uncommon.
I disagree, and the cancel culture, there was cancel culture before the civil rights movement, and what you're seeing now is the pull from the push of that cancel culture. You see African Americans given the right to vote, the right to citizenship, but we're not giving the easy right to vote. This is their ideas being canceled, and it leads to actual things happening that change lives for the worse for one group, but for that group that has canceled the other. And in history, you see that brings about discussion, maybe uprisings that improve quality of standards of living for people.
If you don't mind, let's kind of go back to the audience and ask for more questions. I will mention, in terms of examples, just recently I saw a headline here in Wisconsin that mentioned that children, I don't know if it was middle or high school, they learned some songs. One song was focusing on inclusion and basically focused on diversity, and they were not allowed to sing the song anymore because some parents were complaining that this might sort of push a woke agenda, so the song got canceled, which, we can also, so we have to always keep in mind that, canceling, can take place on both sides. Here's a question from a student.
So people only get canceled if a majority of people agree that what they're saying or doing is wrong. And that's kind of how, the president and Congress also gets elected. A majority of people have to vote them in. So if we can vote in and a majority of people decide who gets to run our country, why can't a majority of people get to decide what's okay to say, especially if it is offending that many people that a majority of people in a country are getting offended?
Well,
The question is about how important is it to take into account sort of majority opinion versus maybe, the tyranny of the majority, but in this case, sort of, if we have elections, we care about who is in the majority. Does this also apply to speech and maybe the cancel culture?
I think it does, but I think that you would say that goes back to it being a people problem, a human problem, and maybe it's good, but I feel like there could be evils to it. What if the dominant culture or the majority is not, leading towards what is good for the greater good, and we've seen that in history, and this is where our good tool of cancel culture comes into effect, and this is how we get back on the path that's gonna be better for people, it's gonna be better for law, it's gonna be just better in general. I feel like you cannot have government proceedings without some type of cancel culture.
You do seem to me that you're applying the word cancel culture to anything that in your mind moves culture forward, which is kind of slippery. But
I've stated that cancel culture can happen in both a bad and a good way,
absolutely.
but it creates discussion.
Sure.
And all discussion is good.
But you can discuss things without canceling anybody. And to go back to what you said, we are not a democracy. I gotta make that very clear. This is not majority rule country. This is not a country that was envisioned to be whoever has the most vote wins. Donald Trump did not win the popular vote, but he became president. This is, I repeat, this is a country which is unique. We enshrine the idea, even if we didn't live up to it, not immediately and not even completely. Still, it is the law, I don't believe it's cancel culture, it's the law that brought us to this level of progress. Because whatever Thomas Jefferson did or didn't own, he wrote a document that would require, sooner or later, for us to treat legally everybody the same. And so, this is one of the rare countries in the history of the world that actually set up a system, even though they didn't apply it correctly initially, that looked out specifically for minority rights. Now, I'm suggesting my argument is on the side of minority rights. What you guys seem to be suggesting is that the most people win. And I would go one step further. Cancel culture, there's 350 million Americans. How many people on their Twitter phones are canceling people? It's hundreds, if not just thousands. The idea that a majority of people in this country have tried to cancel anybody is nonsense. It's very small roving bands of anonymous activists on Twitter and Facebook. Very small numbers of people having that kind of an impact to the detriment of overall society.
I have a couple statistics, and the great question was, does calling people out or cancel culture on social media represent accountability or unjust punishment? And of the people who chose the side, 38% of Americans said that it punishes people who do not deserve it, and 58% of Americans says that it holds people accountable. 38% of the Americans of the 38% of Americans that said it punishes people, most of them, being 59% of them, were conservatives or Republican or leading Republican, and other people saying that it's holding, of the 58% saying that people are being held accountable for their actions, 75% were Democrat or leaning Democrat and liberal. So maybe there is truth to what you're saying to the majority of society, but I think when you use the word minority, you're thinking of the smaller amount of people. I think the term minority is pointing towards the amount of people who have historically less power than the dominant group. And there is power in the number of people, but like you said, Donald Trump didn't get the most votes, and he had the most influence in those areas that received the most voting power.
He won the Electoral College.
Yes.
Right, which is one of those safeguards. And what you said I kind of liked. You used the word calling out. I have no problem calling people out. I would wish a higher number of Americans believe that on both parties. Calling people out is not the same thing as canceling them. And that's where I keep coming back to with this, right? And even that conversation that we just had, I mean, when we're taking words now and we're limiting what it can mean, when we take the word minority, which is a good word to apply to anybody who doesn't have power, even people who are not ethnically diverse, to take words like that and to say, we only really can apply that to certain kinds of people, this gerrymandering words to mean what one particular political position wants them to mean, is troublesome, to tell you the truth. That's why I want more speech, not less. I want more argument, not less. I want more confusion, more whimsy, more disagreement, because out of that we'll sift and winnow the better ideas. We are not the country we were 250 years ago. We are not the country we were 50 years ago. 50 years from now, we will be a different country. And all of that, most of that happened with, at least recently, by law, not by threatening to silence people who disagree with you somehow or another.
There's another question.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, maybe I heard this wrong. Did you say that the Electoral College was a safeguard that allowed Donald Trump to win?
No, I said the Electoral College is how he got the presidency, not because he had a lot of influence. And that it was, what I should have said, perhaps to be more thorough, was this is the way the Founding Fathers understood to minimize the power of a simple majority from monopolizing power.
Are you in favor of the Electoral College?
I believe that the constitutional structure that was given to us by the Founding Fathers is imperfect, but better than anything else we currently have, or anybody else has ever had. I believe that. You
Basically already answered one of the questions that I had here, which was, is there an alternative to cancel culture, and what would that look like? What would you think, consider appropriate?
Let the marketplace of ideas run. Let it run. I trust enough people, if somebody was saying something really hateful, that enough people would disassociate from that person, isolate them, leave them alone. Now, we don't need to have quasi-laws or ersatz laws or customs that destroy people who say things that some people don't like, because it comes back down to this. Who gets to decide what those words mean? Who gets to decide which is too much and which is too little? I like what C.S. Lewis said. He said, I'm a Democrat not because I deserve a share in government. I am a Democrat, of course, he's English, he didn't mean Democrat, Republican, he just meant a believer in democracy. I am a believer in democracy, he says, because I'm one of those people who is too lazy, or too uneducated, or too bored to be challenged, to be given absolute power over anybody. What makes us equal is our ability to be radically individual in our opinions, to be offensive when it happens, to be empathetic when it happens. That's messy, but it's good.
Thank you.
That's unrealistic. I don't think you can have a world, or even, let's make it smaller, a nation where anyone can speak their own good and you have a clear running nation without it becoming a chaotic battlefield. I think that order is necessary, even if it is a loose order that allows people. I think that's what schools really help, especially this one here where we have a liberal arts college where a lot of people are able to share ideas in a respectful way. That's always encouraged. To answer your question, I think maybe if cancel culture wasn't like straight to disenfranchisement, which we have seen, and it's not good, and it does lead to good conversation, but maybe if it was a little lighter in that aspect and more focused on educating the person and to not changing their ideas, but maybe how can these ideas be shared in a better way that doesn't invoke harassment on another individual.
We do have time for more questions. Yes, in the back.
So where did cancel culture, the term, come from? Because to me it seems like it's the new boogeyman that was political correctness, which oftentimes the people that complained about political correctness were people who said something that was really, and then they got called out on it, and now all of a sudden, oh, you just want me to be politically correct. So now we don't say that, now we say you're canceling me. And so it seems like they're both, are they the same thing?
I think the young man was correct, that this is an evolution. Political correctness was something that was subtly enforced, but no one lost things. No one generally lost their jobs. People would raise their eyebrows or roll their eyes, but people moved forward. The movement from political correctness, and by the way, you know the first one who came up with the word political correctness? Chairman Mao in his little red book. That he's the one who created the term political correctness to punish speech that is not state-sponsored speech. I would suggest that the second step of that is once you have established that a state entity is responsible for what you can and cannot say, the next step is what we're seeing now. Now you start punishing or canceling people who have those ideas.
Please.
But isn't that exactly what's happened in Florida? Don't say gay.
Yeah.
You can't be teaching this. I mean, think about all the parents who are gay, whose kids are in those schools. Think about the transgender kids who are in those schools. And now they're canceled because a certain group of parents is saying, I don't want my kids exposed to this when their kids are exposed to it.
As a matter of fact, and I hope you check me on this, the word gay never appears in that legislation, nor does trans. Nor are you allowed to teach heterosexual sex to children, and it only applies up to 3rd grade. What the bill says, we don't teach any radical sexuality or gender theory to children under the age of 7. That's what it says. That's a fact. They call it the Don't Say Gay bill, but that's let's just call that a very twisted view of what is, it's misleading.
But
So,
if they can cancel all these books, which they are doing, that's very...
For those kids.
But not just for gay kids, but also for black kids, etc. So books on Robinson and his baseball career are gone. I mean, so this, you can say that finally these people have power, but their power is really hurting a large segment of the population.
You're conflating the what you call the Don't Say Gay bill with the CRT and the advanced history stuff.
Well, they're
Conflating
putting it
those
all
things.
together into a
What
law.
I would say, I mean, this is way more complicated. I repeat what I said before. I personally don't want any sex, including heterosexual sex, taught to middle schoolers and elementary school. We never did that in human history before. I don't see why we would need to do it now. I'm all for it. Upper middle school, high school, do whatever you want. So the question is not, them censoring books. It's saying that some books are inappropriate for young kids. That strikes me as a shockingly rational thing to say.
There were two hands in the back.
Just to follow
Dean Cisco.
Yeah, just to follow up. In the bill, they don't refer to gay. What is radical sexuality and what is non-radical?
Well, according to the bill which I've read, it's teaching children as young as 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 that their gender may not match their biology. Which is interesting because little kids can't think, kids that young, biologically, their brains are not, they're not abstract thinkers. When you're telling children that young anything, like Santa Claus exists, you are telling them something that they believe. And so, if you don't have the power to think abstractly, how can a child that young process any of that information? And there's a reason why, it has nothing to do with heteronormativity, there's a reason why we haven't sexualized little kids' classrooms, even for heterosexual domination. It's because kids can't process that stuff. It's not I mean, you feel free to disagree with it, but the arguments aren't irrational.
Yeah.
We've got to let him speak on that too.
A child can begin to feel as if they are, can fall under, I don't know how I say this, can feel as if they aren't with their gender as young as those ages go. And I also think in teaching sex, in some communities, those are relevant things to talk about in a lot of communities. And what we've been talking about before, I think you're kind of going back on some things with you refute all cancel culture, because this is canceling.
Little kids can feel a lot of things. They can be pirates, they can be all kinds of things, but they can't think logically to process this. It's why we don't try to do that to little kids, force them to believe anything in the public schools. We try to teach them, we bring them along. But feelings, and this is something that we haven't brought up, much of cancel culture, it seems to me, is based on feelings, not thoughts. And the idea that feelings in a free society have the same importance as logic and truth and ideas is also problematic. And when we default to feelings, not anything else, then nothing has to make any sense. There's no rationality behind anything necessarily.
I don't think it's forcing. I think the goal of education is to get students to start to realize their own identity and realize how their identity just becomes a part of society. And it's not forcing. I feel like maybe you're portraying a little bit of your beliefs on that particular area, but it's really just presenting the idea if anything is helping the student in finding their identity.
So you would be okay if some public school system in some conservative state was teaching 6 and 7-year-olds a primary diet of radical sexual heterosexual. You'd be okay with that? Given that most people are heterosexual, you would be okay with even borderline pornography in the schools?
So at what point is it okay? Because if you said there is a point where it is okay,
Of course.
it is okay to teach that young. But you're not showing pornography. You're simply saying that this is something that exists in the world. This is something that you could be. This is something that you don't have to be because it's the dominant and respected.
I mean, I got 40 hours of video of some of those books. Some of those books are pornographic. Nevertheless, I agree with you. There is a time for it. Just like there's a time to teach kids biology. We don't teach biology to little kids because they can't process it. We teach them biology when they're old enough to handle it. I would suggest things like sexuality are better taught at ages when they are better able to think about rather than just feel what the information is.
Let's go back to questions. Henrik had a question in the back.
You talk a lot about who gets to choose to cancel who, but then I pose the question, who gets to choose and why does the Florida legislator get to choose what books to ban and what ideas?
Because the legislature is in charge of the public school system, by law and by election, that's why.
Then that's by majority because they were elected in, so then why is it not allowable that people are allowed to cancel others by majority?
Well, you vote people that you want, right? I mean, the point that majorities don't have power, they do. The point is that the system that we have is balanced, right? And so in a state like Florida, you have more restrictive terms. In a state like Massachusetts, you have much more radically progressive ones. And this is what it's the same thing with the Dobbs case, right? I keep hearing it's the same argument that somehow Dobbs banned abortions. No, what it did is it allows states like Massachusetts to have more of it, or California, states like Oklahoma to have less of it. So rather than having a federal case, a federal precedent, you have states. And this is what the Founding Fathers envisioned. States, not the federal government, deciding what the people of the states would do, not a federal entity. And so in Florida, people voted for this, and so that's what you got. If you want to change it, vote them out.
Okay, so you talked about not liking it. I might be misinterpreting what you think. But you talked about you don't like cancel culture because it takes power away from the minority. So then why is it okay to take the power away from the minority, which would be Democrats in Florida, when it comes to ideas about whatever sexualized or learning about the certain biology
I
of
only
sex?
mention the minority in terms of what the Founding Fathers were doing. They set up a system of checks and balances that made sure that minority rights were accounted for, not just simple democracy. That was my only point about the minorities there. I would say, because it's the same thing about a local city council, right? People vote, that's how it works. People vote, then if there's a majority of people that are able to vote for something, you do it. That's the law. I'm simply suggesting the law is different than cancel culture. If you're using laws to unconstitutionally silence speech, whether it's a civil level or a state level or a federal level, that's what the Constitution is there for.
Didn't that school board in Massachusetts have the legal right to fire that person?
If I were him, I'd sue. I don't think they do. I don't think you can fire somebody for the use of the word lady. I don't think you can get away with that, not even in Massachusetts. In fact, I believe that if he sued them, he would win that law case. Might not be California or Massachusetts. Might have to bump up.
Okay, but that's where he is.
Right. I think he would win that.
Well,
I do.
let's move on.
Depends on what the contract
case,
says.
and Grace has another question.
Actually.
It's not really a question. I'm just saying as someone who speaks regularly with the job office here, he wasn't refused because the term lady was gendered. It was because he was referring to people in a superior position to him as ladies rather than using their specific names, using their titles. These were people with titles. He wasn't fired because of cancel culture. He was fired because he wasn't behaving properly in a business situation. I'm non-binary. I would have been fired.
What is the difference? He used the wrong word.
He used the wrong word because this was a professional situation, and that professional.
The word he used was not a bad word.
It was not a bad word, but it's not an inherently respectful word.
So who decides that?
The school board.
Yeah, the school board. There are people in position of power in this place, and then also a majority of society. If you walk into, I don't know, a job interview and you call the person just lady, you're sitting there as a man, you're like, oh, hey lady, that is not professional, that is not appropriate in that situation. There are general rules in a society, and these rules in this example are that you need to refer to this person with respectful speech, and referring to someone as just lady is an incredibly casual term.
Where does this rule come from that you talk about? What law is it enshrined in?
It is not a law.
So it's a rule. So who then enforces it?
It's a social construction of these are appropriate behaviors in a certain societal construct. If you want to disregard all those laws, I would welcome.
What laws?
Those societal constructions of rules in which there are certain places where certain language is applicable and certain places where it is not. I would appreciate those laws to be reduced.
They're not laws.
They are not laws. Please stop repeating that. I am using these words and they're coming out jumbled because my words aren't always the best. Okay, so these are rules.
Norms. We can call them norms, and when people violate norms, they sometimes pay a price for that. That happens in every kind of setting.
Maybe there is some legislation inside of the school board's rules or laws of the school board that says that this is a professional space. You're gonna refer to everyone, no matter who they are, by these professional names.
Yeah, and just So, when you described an example of opposing cancel culture, you were like, oh, you can be, if you say something inappropriate, you can be socially isolated, you can be socially rejected. How is that different from cancel culture? It's like, you're being socially rejected, and then because you're being socially rejected, jobs no longer want to hire you because you're not socially applicable. Like, people are losing deals because they are no longer popular because people don't appreciate the words that they're using. I don't understand how your example is anywhere different from cancel culture.
What I'm suggesting to you, this is America. Individuals have the right to associate or not associate with anybody. When it becomes collective and mob-driven, it's a different thing.
But no, that's exactly what cancel culture is. It's people saying, I do not want to listen to R. Kelly's music because he's a child molester. And maybe that will happen on a larger societal level. Like maybe people will realize, I don't want to be associated with a child molester, so I'm not going to associate with R. Kelly. Like, I don't understand how your example is any different other than it's at a societal level. And like, of course, something as large as like a child molester is going to face repercussions at a societal level.
I'll repeat it for you. We are a nation of laws, not a nation of opinions or rules or norms. In the end, we have a Bill of Rights, we have a Constitution, we have a legal structure. These cases, what you're talking about, has been adjudicated 1,000 times over the last 200 years. We have a process to go through. All I'm saying is that whatever the norm is, this man has a right, I believe, to sue, depending upon what's in the contract, which none of us have seen, right? And, if he, and I do believe that something as losing your position over this kind of a norm, I think that the courts have, at all levels, have come back again and again and again, that the individual's right to speak is guaranteed by the First Amendment.
Okay, you're getting off topic. I'm sorry, but I want to finish this thought. Sorry. But you're getting off topic. What we're dealing with is these are not legal repercussions. These are societal repercussions where people no longer want to be associated with someone, and businesses no longer want to be associated with someone. This is not legal punishment. You're not being canceled. It's being canceled is not a legal punishment. It's facing repercussions for your actions.
So if I don't want to be associated with you because you're black, if I don't want to do that, then I'm allowed to do that. If I get a bunch of people who want to do that, I can do that as well.
I mean, legally you can do that, but you're going to face repercussions.
The law.
Yeah.
There you go.
Legal.
Thank you. Norms can't adjudicate anything. Law
There
can.
is legal things that you cannot discriminate against someone. You can like no longer want to socially interact with someone because they're black, and then you'll face social repercussions for being a fucking racist. But
I can see that there's more demand for more discussion. Hopefully we can have another discussion at some point. The panelists requested to share a couple of parting thoughts, final statement, if you will. The only thing I would ask you is to kind of keep it really brief, maybe like a minute or so for each side. I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll begin. As I've stated, cancel culture is necessary. I don't think that you can exist without cancel culture. There will always be a push and pull in society of what is right and what is wrong. Who gets to decide that? The people. That's really all that matters. If the people can't decide it, then who does decide it? If you can't have cancel culture, then you can't have your way in a nation where law does rule. So cancel culture is necessary. You can't live without it. Our America wouldn't be the same as today, where people are now being allowed to say and enter areas where they haven't before. Cancel culture has existed with us all throughout human history, and it will continue. You can't avoid it. And maybe considered as necessary evil. I think it's a part of education. It starts in schools, and I think it can continue to be refined, and maybe some of the stipulations that some people receive for saying things that society disagrees with will be softened in the future to allow for more encouragement of speaking out. Because again, these things have to hit the air in order to be canceled. So, and I don't think cancel culture, cancel culture shouldn't slow this from happening. And I think that's some of your fears, that cancel culture will make people less confident in saying what they want to say. And I hope that we can push for a world where people continue to say that because there are evils in the world, and I'd rather have those out than contained. So there can be education.
So again, your answer is to remediate, right? We're going to remediate speech we don't like. And I bet to me that's a non-starter. No one has that right. No teacher has that right. No school has that right. We don't get to program people. We don't get to punish people for their opinions. And if you want to socially, do that, I want to make it clear too. I said at the beginning, this is America. I'm not suggesting we cancel culture. I think that would be a problem. I'm simply saying that it's immoral, it's anti-American, and it leads to very bad things. And if you look at the regimes through history, whether they're religious or socialist or capitalist, when you look at the regimes through history, who have walked down that road, it has always ended in tyranny. And I'm going to close my statement with just a couple of quotes. According to Diogenes, the ancient Greek, the mob is the mother of tyrants. According to Ayn Rand, rights are not a matter of numbers, and there can be no such thing in law or morality as actions forbidden to an individual but are permitted to a mob. And finally, Abraham Lincoln, there is no grievance that is a fit object for redress by mob law. That's all.
Well, let's thank our panelists. And a really special thank you to Jamar, because it's not easy. He certainly didn't have time to read 274 articles on the subject matter, and he also hasn't done 3,000 interviews, so that's really amazing that he stood up here. And I want to say, as far as our next event is concerned, the next event will be next week, Thursday, April 20th. We had to cancel one event because of the weather. Dr. Catherine Kramer from UW-Madison will join us to discuss her book, The Politics of Resentment. So we hope to see you at 4:30 right here. Thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate your thoughts, your ideas, and have a good night.